Kia ora. Welcome back to part 2 of this lecture on questioning. Now in part 1 we looked at how the use of questions could support students' ability to respond at both lower and higher order thinking. Then we looked at Bloom's taxonomy's thinking skills and linked that to the sorts of questions we could use. In the second part of the lecture, I'm going to use a context to demonstrate the sorts of student activities and tasks that we could associate with the 6 thinking skills from Bloom's revised taxonomy. I'm going to describe a context that could be used in a classroom to engage students. Imagine Te Papa is to hold an exhibition that looks at the relationship between 2 contemporary Pasifika artists and traditional tapa cloth. The artists I've chosen are John Pule and Fatu Fe'uu. Fatu grew up in Samoa and immigrated to New Zealand in 1966 when he was 20, and has been exhibiting his artwork since the early 80s. His work frequently blends traditional and contemporary elements, incorporating a whole range of influences and inspirations and motifs from Samoa and New Zealand, and more generally motifs from Europe and other Pasifika cultures. John Pule was born in 1962 and is a Niuean artist and a novelist and a poet, and he's lived in New Zealand from the age of 3. His work expresses his experiences as a Niuean in New Zealand, and like Fatu, he blends traditional and contemporary elements in his artworks. The exhibition will also contain traditional tapa cloth, especially from Samoa and Niue. Visitors to the exhibition will get the opportunity to see Pule and Fe'uu's contemporary artworks alongside the designs and motifs that would have influenced them. The reason I've chosen Te Papa is because they have an extensive collection of Pasifika artefacts. Imagine the class you are teaching are going to visit Te Papa and see that exhibition. If we know the types of questions associated with lower and higher order thinking skills, what sort of questions would a teacher use to engage the students in both the visit and any other associated work? The 6 thinking skills were remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating and creating. When the students are at Te Papa, they could be collecting information about the exhibition. They might even go to a workshop at Te Papa taken by one of the educators there. Then, when you return to the classroom, you could start with a series of questions related to the exhibition they've just seen. You could ask the students who were the artists, or where did they originally come from, or what is tapa cloth. These are all questions related to remembering. You could ask the students to explain why the artists used different cultural motifs in their paintings, or describe the works they saw. Perhaps they could choose 2 works and describe them. This would be understanding questions. You could show them the students other Pasifika artists' work or contemporary Māori artists' work, and ask them to examine the works and see if there were any similarities between the works from the exhibition and these works. These would be applying questions. So that's the 3 lower order thinking skills, but what about the higher order skills? For analysing, you could ask the students to look at the traditional tapa cloth designs and compare them to contemporary paintings and identify common elements, or perhaps compare and contrast 2 artists' works. In evaluating, the students could look at the historical context of immigration from the Pacific region and assess how the works address common issues associated with living in 2 cultures, or the issue of being separated from your culture, or ways 2 cultures can live together. For the creating questions, you could ask the students to write and produce a radio advert promoting the exhibition, or design and produce an exhibition catalogue, or even write a play which addresses the issues surrounding immigration. When you're in a classroom, encourage discussion through the use of questions. Avoid closed questions, which are those which can be answered with a yes or a no. Decide on the purpose of the questions you're going to ask. Remember to use a follow-up question to probe a student's understanding and get them to elaborate and support their answers. And just remember that it's the higher order questions we ask students that are going to help them develop a deeper understanding. Right, now we're going to go outside. This is a local area of bush about 5 minutes from my house. Now, wherever we live in New Zealand, there is always some local area of small bush, or maybe somewhere like this. In this particular area of bush, the local community have decided to raise money and build a predator-free fence around 700 hectares, and they're going to create a wildlife sanctuary, very much like Zealandia in Wellington. So this is an example of the predator-free fence that they're going to build around the whole of the 700 hectares. At present, this sanctuary has an information centre which is primarily geared towards school visits. They also employ an educator who will help develop school programmes and guide students around the sanctuary. Schools focus on many aspects of this sanctuary, whether it is the problem of eradicating pests, or the cultural significance of the flora, or the impact of human settlement. There's a live webcam in the centre where students can watch native birds feeding. I can't believe that this is actually only 5 minutes from where I live. This bush, it's just phenomenal. I mean, originally they used to dam the stream here when the first Pakeha settlers came to this area, and they piped the water down the valley to the local town. But of course that doesn't happen now. And now the local community are trying to reclaim this bush, and lots of schools come up here, in fact, and use this for all sorts of things, for science studies, for social studies, for arts lessons, both primary, intermediate and secondary. In fact, some of the traps that they've used here were designed by the local secondary school, and some of the local primary schools have designed the weta houses. This area is set in a steep-sided valley, and as a consequence the vegetation changes as you move up the valley sides. A stream runs through the valley floor. As they continue to develop this valley, they are laying data cable along the pathways to create interactive information points throughout the whole sanctuary. This area is surrounded by a high ridge where native birds can often be seen circling the whole valley. As part of creating this sanctuary, the trustees are also putting in place an outdoor classroom. So what we can see here is the starting point of creating this outdoor space. Also part of the space, they're running data cable here so students can use the internet, they can use microscopes out here in the bush, and so this will be an amazing place to bring students and use the bush as the classroom. Now what I want you to do for your workshop is, in groups of 3 or 4, I want you to develop a range of lower and higher order questions and activities based on a visit to this area of the bush, and I want you to present your ideas back to the class. Well, good luck in developing those ideas about the bush visit. In fact, you might be able to use some of them in your practicums when you go and start teaching. But just remember, one of the most important tools you can use as a teacher is questioning. And another important tool is the context in which you teach. You may have noticed that all the contexts I've used for my examples have taken students outside the classroom. It's the starting point of all these contexts was real. And it's these real contexts that we use to engage and excite students. And it's the higher order thinking skills that give them the opportunity to develop. Well, I think I'm going to go back to the bush for a walk now. Kia ora.